Uh, Hi there. I guess you could say that I'm writing this as a cautionary tale to those who plan on studying abroad in the future. I don't mean to discourage you from doing it in the first place. It's more like I just want you to be aware of this so that something like this doesn't happen to you. I guess I should explain a bit more. Late summer, I was selected to participate in the study abroad program that would be centered in Rome for several months. Like anyone would be, I was elated. I had never been out of the States before, so this was going to be a real adventure for me. In the weeks that followed, I happily packed anything and everything that I could fit into my suitcase. And I'll be the first to admit that I had way overpacked for this trip. I was nervous about leaving my parents for the first time, but I was also excited for the newfound freedom that I would have while in Europe. Before I knew it, my parents were dropping me off at the airport, and I was boarding a 19-hour flight to Rome. And despite being long and tedious, the flight wasn't all that bad. When I exited the airport, I was greeted by the program supervisor and several other students who would be studying with me. They were about the same age and all looked just as excited as me, and from there we went to our mandatory orientation meetings, and afterward we went to pick up our apartment keys. In the months that preceded the trip, we were responsible for getting to know our would-be roommates, as well as finding a place to stay that we could all afford, and there were 3 girls that I'd be staying with. They were all nice enough and made an effort to make me feel welcome, although I will admit that it's kind of hard to get close to the group of preformed friends. But despite my slight alienation, it seemed that things were all going to work out well enough. And all of us were all on a similar budget plan, and by that I mean none of us really had much money to spend. Because of this, we were all on the same page while searching for the cheapest apartment that we could find, and after several days of searching, we stumbled across an ad for an ancient apartment located above the Campo di Fiori. That was a prime location. We couldn't believe that it was still available, no less listed for an unbelievably low price. And this immediately sent alarm bells off in my head. The place was enormous, yet the rent was cheaper than the much smaller apartments in the far less desirable parts of town. However, reason never really wins out in a group of excited young students, and they had already made up their minds, and if I was staying with them, this was my only option. We each received our own set of keys, as well as a map with walking directions. Because of its prime location, it really didn't take us long to get there. The Campo was amazing. During the daytime, it was filled with a vibrant market, while during the evening, it was lined with lively street performers, and all of the apartments surrounding it looked to be, ancient, so ours really didn't stand out all that much. After circling the square 3 or 4 times, we finally noticed that the number nailed to the front of a massive old wooden door. And this would be our home for the next 3 months. I fought with my keys for a moment until there was an audible click of the heavy old lock, and the thick old door swung forward with a screech. We were then met with a long, winding staircase. We all looked at one another and groaned, and none of us had accounted for the fact that the building had been constructed before elevators were common, so 3 sets of stairs and countless complaints later, all 4 of us with luggage in hand stood outside of our new front door. Once again, I reached for my set of keys and fought with a stubborn lock, and as soon as the front door was open, there was a stampede of young adults trying to claim the best rooms. Being in a 3-bedroom apartment, it meant that 2 of us would have to share, and I personally didn't really care, so I let the others battle it out. When the dust had settled, I found that I would be sharing a room with a girl called Stephanie. That was fine with me. Stephanie was nice enough, and she was very quiet, my ideal feature in a roommate. Over the course of the rest of the day, we ran around exploring our new home. There were 2 bathrooms, a full kitchen, and a living room with an ancient TV, and once again I began to feel uneasy. Just how was it that we were able to get all of this for such a low price? But before I could finish the thought, I was interrupted by a fit of loud squealing. My initial reaction was to panic. However, I soon learned that all the noise was from excitement. Down at the other end of the apartment near the front door, apparently there was another part of the flat that we had missed. I followed the noise until it led me to the long, dark hallway. And there at the end, behind the group of squealing women, was a washing and drying machine. For those of you who are thinking, what's the big deal? I should explain that these things are incredibly rare in Rome. I mean, generally exchange students would have to wash their clothes by hand in the sink before hanging them up out to dry. What was a luxury item like this doing in such a cheap apartment? Just as the screaming quelled, it picked right up again as the girls noticed a door adjacent to the washing machine, and beyond that door was a master bathroom. It had a balcony, a clawfoot tub, and even a bidet. The girls immediately started fighting over whose bathroom this was going to be, and I didn't really see why we couldn't share, but apparently the others were dead set on having ownership. As it turned out, it ended up being my bathroom. Stephanie had made a logical argument that because she and I had to share a bedroom, while the other two got their own, it was only fair that she and I got to share the master bathroom. And I'll admit that at first I was actually kind of excited. It was, after all, a really nice room. However, over the course of the next several weeks, I began to grow more and more wary of the room. I don't really know how to put it into words. It's like every time I went into the bathroom, I could feel someone's eyes on me. And the voyeuristic elements weren't really what had me so unnerved. It felt like whatever was watching me was angry. That it didn't want me there, and that it wanted to hurt me. I began doing everything in my power to avoid the room, and I asked Alicia if she would mind if I were to use her restroom occasionally. I made up a lame excuse about how it was far more convenient since her room was close, while my bathroom was at the other end of the flat, at the end of the very long hallway, and she happily agreed, though when I told her that she could use my bathroom anytime she liked. This worked well for a while. For about the first 2 months of our trip, I was able to completely avoid the eerie room. It wasn't until the final month that everything began to unravel. One night, as I prepared to brush my teeth, I found that Alicia was already occupying her bathroom, and I could hear giggles coming from down the hallway. It was clear that Stephanie and our other roommate were both getting ready for bed in the master bath. So I decided that since there was strength in numbers, it would be alright just for tonight. So I made my way down to the large bathroom, where I joined the girls in brushing my teeth. They were in the midst of some conversation when Lindsay, our other roommate, had broken into such a furious fit of laughter that she had to lean on the wall for support, but suddenly she jolted upright, as if she had been shocked. We all looked at what had been the cause of her reaction, and there on the wall, about the same level as the bathtub, was a tiny door. None of us had noticed it because it was the same color as the wall, and the landlord had even painted over it. And naturally, this made me a bit nervous. I mean, whatever it was, the landlord clearly didn't want anyone opening it, but as usual, throwing all caution to the wind, Lindsay reached for the handle and began tugging with all of her might, and Stephanie clucked her tongue in disapproval before pulling out a small pocket knife. She began delicately carving along the seam of the door. And I wanted to beg her to stop, but I really didn't have the energy to argue that night. So within a few minutes, Lindsay had yanked the little door open with a loud crack. And it was a crawl space. It was fairly large, and my guess would have been that you could fit at least 3 or 4 people in there. I was rather curious as to why the landlord would have sealed up an empty little room. While I thought about this, Stephanie and Lindsay began calling for Alicia to come see their new discovery, and she was just as excited as they were when they first discovered it. However, as could be expected, this excitement waned over, and eventually the crawl space was just turned into storage for a few towels and laundry baskets. In the following days after the unsealing of the crawl space, things started to go from eerie to downright terrifying. Annoyingly, Alicia had changed her nightly routine so that I could no longer use her bathroom in the evening, and once again I was back in the large bathroom. All the while, the feeling that I was being watched growing worse and worse. I began to get so paranoid each time that I went into the bathroom that I would literally jump at the slightest noise of pipes settling, and as soon as I finished, I would run at full speed down the hallway and close the door behind me. For some reason, I seemed to be the only one feeling this way. It's not like I could have told the others either. I was already enough of an outcast as it was, so I just kept to myself and hoped that it would go away eventually. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I found myself alone in the bathroom. As I stood in front of the mirror brushing my teeth, something set the hairs on the back of my neck standing straight up. There was a faint rustling noise. Not the kind that could have been caused by my roommates at the other end of the flat. Any noises caused by them would have had to have been quite loud to reach me all the way at this end of the long hallway. No, this noise was very faint, the sound of someone gargling, shuffling through things. I stood completely silent. Terror filled me. The soft rustling noise was coming from inside of the crawlspace, and I turned on my heels and ran down the hallway and grabbed the attention of my roommates. I tried to explain to them what happened, but all that came out was an incoherent murmur. Eventually I managed to stutter out, "Something's inside the crawlspace," and they looked at me with fear and confusion in their eyes. As a pack, we moved together down the hallway into the bathroom, and I nearly fainted when I saw the tiny door hanging fully ajar. Although this discovery filled me with horror, Alicia immediately pointed to the balcony sliding door. Stephanie had left it open to air out the bathroom after having to take a shower several hours ago, and she peeked her head out the door and pointed to the slanted rooftop adjacent to ours. There was a pigeon's nest occupied by a few birds. The girls surmised that a pigeon must have found its way in and was the cause of the disturbance, and they all had a good laugh as we made our way back to the living room, and I pretended to shake it off, but I knew it was not a pigeon that caused the rustling noise. I mean, first off, the tiny door had been shut tightly all day. None of us really cared to leave it open because it smelled quite musty inside, and secondly, the door had been shut when I left the bathroom. I'm certain of this. Yet, there it was, wide open when I returned. You're not going to tell me that a pigeon knows how to and is capable of opening and closing a door all by itself. It was at this point that I began to suspect that something was terribly wrong with this apartment. When I got back to my room, I pulled my laptop and called my best friend via Skype. She had always been the skeptical and methodical type, however, she also kept an open mind towards things that were hard to explain. I decided that out of anyone, she was probably the best to talk to about my situation, and as I expected, she was initially quite doubtful, though she also agreed that a pigeon was quite likely not the source. She asked me if I had any photos of the crawlspace. She said that if she could see it, that would help her understand a little more clearly, and possibly help her come up with a more logical explanation. Relieved at her willingness to at least hear me out, I reached for my camera and made my way back down the eerie hallway, and when I arrived, I found to my relief that the door was still closed. I stood in front of it for a moment, gathered my nerve, before finally pulling the little door open. And despite the clutter left inside by my roommates, it was empty. I snapped a quick photo before closing the door once more and running back to my room. I immediately plugged my camera into my computer and uploaded the photos, and when I finally opened the image, I was petrified by what I saw. There in the upper right-hand corner was a face, baring its teeth at me. My whole body began to violently shake. Dear God, that thing is in our home, I muttered to myself. Fear began to overtake me. Someone had sealed whatever it was inside of that crawlspace, and we had let it out. And I was so absorbed in my panic that I didn't even notice that when my roommates returned, she was blissfully unaware of the imminent danger that we were in. Yet, even if I tried to warn her, she would not believe me. I was at a loss for what to do, and I finally decided that I would deal with it in the morning. Though, not by a large amount, I did feel braver in the sunlight. From there, I attempted to get some sleep. Though for the first time, ever since being there, I closed and bolted my door before getting to bed. Stephanie eyed me suspiciously while doing so I just told her jokingly that Lindsay had been sneaking into our room the previous night and had been stealing my Nutella, and she laughed heartily, shaking her head before settling down for the night. I'll admit that the only reason I was able to find any sleep that night was because of her presence. Something about not being alone can give one a sense of false security.